morning, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm Marilyn Carroll. I'm the president of Ridgefield League of Women Voters, and I'm delighted to see so many of you, here this morning. And I'd like to welcome you all officially welcome our legislators who Linda Hanley will introduce very shortly. I'd like to thank the Nutmeg chapter of the NCL for providing all those treats and for all the volunteers who have helped today. And I'd especially like to thank our partner, the Ridgefield Library, for co-sponsoring this event and for continuing to be such a great partner for this event. And I'd like to wish Leslie Lampton a happy birthday. She came in here on her birthday. That's a good part of it.
You're supposed to say.
Many of you who have attended the League and Library programs before, but for those of you who are unfamiliar with the League, we are a nonpartisan organization who neither supports nor opposes political candidates, parties, or elected officials. Our mission is to encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government, work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. Now, before we start our program, I'd like to just let you know about one of our other educational programs, our Get to Know Your Town program. Our next one is April 9th at 10:30 at the Town Hall Lower Level Conference Room, and our guest speaker will be the Chair of the Planning and Zoning and Inland Wetlands Board, Rebecca McKetty. And you're all invited to attend our annual fundraiser at Gallows for our guest bartender evening on May 14th, where we will be raffling off our beautiful painting from Ridgefield artist Rhonda Gentry, Yellow Roses, and she's been very supportive of the League and we appreciate her support. We have a big crowd here today, and I'm sure that there are many folks who would like to ask questions to our legislators. When the time comes, you're going to stand in line right in the middle. I'll have the microphone for you, and we will ask that you ask one brief question. We would ask that you not make all kinds of comments or state your positions about everything. We're here to listen to the legislators' positions, so just one brief comment. Because there are a lot of folks who want the opportunity to speak. So please wait for the legislator to respond, and then I will go on to the next person. And finally, if there is a question or a comment, no comments, sorry, take that out, becomes too long, either Mrs. Hanley or I will politely but firmly ask you to wrap it up. We might ask the legislators to wrap it up as well, because sometimes they get so enthusiastic that some folks might not have an opportunity to ask a question. With that, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Mrs. Linda Hanley, who is our program chair. She will introduce our legislators to you and add in any information that I have forgotten before the program begins. And again, thank you, gentlemen, for coming today. We're very excited to see you all. Thank you for your service.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see everyone.
I just wanted to mention one thing. We are taping this program. We appreciate if nobody else tapes. It will be up on our YouTube channel, and we do it in full. So the gentlemen know it's being taped, and so I just wanted the questioners to know.
That's it.
This Meet Your Legislator event is an annual event that League of Women Voters throughout Connecticut have in their communities where they get together.
Move it across a bit.
Where the local leagues meet with their legislators and ask questions that are disseminated by the League of Women Voters of Connecticut that have to do with issues and legislation that is coming before the Connecticut General Assembly. As I said, I am going to begin, and I'm asking some questions that the League of Connecticut wants answered as part of our information gathering. Then it will be open to you in the audience to ask your questions pertaining to the business of the Connecticut General Assembly. This is an odd year in number-wise, 2019. This means this is the long legislative session. This is the budget from soup to nuts, beginning to end, and the session runs from January 9th to June 5th. I would like to welcome our legislators. To my near left, Ken Gucker, representative of House District 138. Do you have the longest and skinniest district in Connecticut?
No,
Northern
actually,
Ridgefield, Western
we do one just
Danbury.
in Venice, but not in Mass. We have some that people have 5, 6, 7 towns in their population. So
Microphone, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry about that.
Go ahead. Representative John Frey from Connecticut 111th District, and Senator Haskell from Senate District 26. So what I'd like to do is give each legislator about 5 minutes to introduce himself, particularly giving you committee assignments for this session. Representative Gucker?
I want to thank everybody for coming here, and I want to thank the league. I think the last time I came here, it was pouring and raining, and it was very dark. So it's nice to see the spring finally coming here. It's 70 degrees out, or it's supposed to be today. It should be great. I represent the 138th, like you've heard. In Ridgefield, it's everything from George Washington Highway back to Danbury, a sliver of Danbury along the New York line, and a little piece of New Fairfield. My committee assignments are banking, environment, and planning and development. Out of all three of those committee assignments, my last one finished up yesterday, which was planning and development. And I'm here to listen to your concerns, and I want to thank the league for inviting me down again.
Thank you, John Frey from here in Ridgefield. This is my 21st year coming to the league mid-session kind of update. It's funny, it started, we used to do these at Town Hall, remember when we were there. We'd get 5 or 6 league members, and it wasn't really open to the public, and then it grew to, which was the best, we were talking about earlier, it was brunch at Lodwick's house, which we had like hundreds of people. I don't see Lodwick's here this morning, but that was a lot of fun, and then it's devolved to this. So basically, I serve on the Finance Committee. I've served on that during my entire tenure. We're just starting, while a lot of the committees are kind of ended, and they had their deadline. Finance and Appropriations continue to the end, and the last 2 committees to meet have their deadlines. So April's a busy month for Finance and Appropriations. I also serve on the Banks Committee and Legislative Management. And for a short time, I served on the Housing Committee. This session, I've served on that in the past, primarily to deal with 8-30G issues. 2 things happened. They decided not to discuss any 8-30G issues, either pro or con. And then the Republicans won a special election, no spot for the newbie, so I gave up my seat on that committee. So it's Banks, Legislative Management, and Finance for me. As Will and I were talking about earlier, we're kind of in between now. Committees are reaching their deadline. Some committees, some of the bigger committees are still meeting. The actual House and Senate have done very little business. It's pretty much about executive nominations for the governor and some judges, with a couple of state contracts in between. So that'll kind of ramp up in the next month or so. So we're kind of in between, so really this is a good listening time for us to hear what's on your mind on bills that are being discussed.
Thank you so much for organizing this and for having me here today. My name is Will Haskell. I represent the 26th District. That's Westport, Wilton, Weston, Ridgefield, Reading, Bethel, and New Canaan. I'm in my first term. I really want to be here today to echo Representative Frey's comments, to listen to all of you. Our committee work is wrapping up, but I always learn so much from these community conversations. I try to do at least 1 or 2 a week, and I walk away with a much better understanding of how I can represent your interests up in Hartford. My committee assignments, I'm chairing the Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee. It's been a wonderful experience. We wrapped up just last week, and now we try to bring our bills to the full Senate and the full House. My main goal on that committee is to try to make higher education more affordable and accessible. The business community tells us that 75% of jobs in Connecticut will require a degree beyond the high school diploma by the year 2025, and we are not on pace to meet that, not even close. So responding to the interests of the business community as well as the interests of working families who right now can't afford to send their kids to community college or our state universities, let alone some of the very expensive private institutions. We've got to step up to the plate. That's been a top priority there. I also serve as vice chair on the Government Administration and Elections Committee. We had a late night meeting there last night fighting to make it easier for people to vote no matter who you vote for. We want to make sure that everybody has access to the ballot. I'm going on for a long time, so I'll just say that I also serve on the Judiciary Committee, the Environment Committee, and the Transportation Committee. I'd love to talk about, in response to any of your questions, some of the work that's happening on those committees. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, I'm going to start, and as I said, I'm going to be asking questions that are posed throughout the state from local leagues and their League of Women Voters of Connecticut questions. So we're back to government and elections. state constitution contains restrictive language that prevents Connecticut from establishing options for early voting and no excuse absentee voting. Will you support the Secretary of State's efforts to promote a state constitutional amendment to remove this restrictive language? Let's start with you, Senator Haskell.
Absolutely. I'm not just going to vote for it. I'm actively advocating for it every single day. I stood in I sat in this seat during the campaign, and I said that Connecticut was one of only 12 states that doesn't have early voting. We offer people one Tuesday in November to vote. God forbid if you're a commuter or a single working parent or a student and you don't have time to make it to the polls that day. Since the campaign, New York got its act together. They already passed a law, so now we're one of just 11 states that doesn't have early voting. This isn't a Republican-Democratic issue in my mind. Texas, a pretty red state, offers 30 days of early voting. I think West Virginia has 2 weeks. So there's no reason that we shouldn't be providing people with every possible opportunity to vote. The Secretary of State's constitutional amendment would allow for a floor of at least 3 days. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, perhaps. It's not specifically laid out, but 3 days. You don't have to keep every polling place open. It can just be one at Town Hall. I think it's a moderate, reasonable approach, and what we've seen in so many other states is when you give people more opportunities to vote, voter participation increases. This isn't about being a capital D Democrat, a member of the Democratic Party. This is about being a lowercase t Democrat and thinking that we're better off as a society, and our state government and our local government as well as our national government will function better if everybody has a seat at the table and an opportunity to make their voice heard. So it made it out of the Government Administration Elections Committee. It was not as unanimous as I would have liked, but now it has to go on to the full Senate and the full House. And if I could just wrap up very briefly by saying, I think there are the votes to pass at 50% in the Senate, 50% in the House, and then it goes to voters. Or I'm sorry, then it has to go back to the General Assembly and get 50% in the next session and 50% in the following session. It goes to voters to approve or not approve on the ballot in 2022. That means we won't have early voting probably until 2026, and I don't think we can wait that long. I'd really like to fast track it, meaning if we get 75% in the Senate, that's 27 votes, and 75% in the House, it can go to voters to approve or not approve in 2020. I think that that's absolutely crucial, and I'll be fighting and hoping for bipartisan support and then bring it out into the full Senate and the full House.
I've introduced legislation in the past for non-excused absentee ballot applications. We particularly hear from, I can't tell you how many times I've heard from seniors who say, you know, I didn't vote. Why didn't you vote? Well, I was feeling good, and then that morning I woke up on the nail and I didn't vote. And so we want to encourage as many voters to participate as possible. So I haven't seen the bill this year, but we would likely to support that again. Early voting, we've heard from town clerks and registrar voters that the costs involved in previous years in having polling places open for 2 or 3 or 4 days or a week prior to election day and manning those booths. So I'd be interested to see the bill that came out of Will's committee, but I'm not opposed to that. Obviously, the greater participation, the better.
I'm not sure if I can add more to what's already been said. Absolutely, we said it here down in the basement last fall. I think early voting is a necessity. I would also like to go even farther and say, why can't we make Election Day a national holiday? Give people that opportunity to be able to get votes. So we are moving forward with that. I have heard the concerns from the town clerks, at least the town clerk of the city of Danbury, what their workload would look like and how much they would have to deal with. They already have issues with absentee voting as it is, as far as the cost and the manpower that's necessary. But we need to work with them as well as working with the Secretary of State's office. And I think as time goes on, you will find that this will be something that we will pass. It is a necessity, and it's something that people have asked for, and we as legislators should give to them. So absolutely, early voting, not voting often early, but at least early voting and make sure that everybody's vote counts and make sure everybody's heard.
Thank you. Next question. How will you work to support the Citizens Election Program and the State Election Enforcement Commission that is tasked with administering the CEP and the complaint process about campaign finance matters? Representative Frey.
really comes down to what I can see. Again, it probably falls under more of Bill's committee on GAE. I think that's right, yeah. More of a staff and budget issue. I know that the number of audits, the random audits, it used to be 50%, they'd audit campaigns up until a couple of years ago, and then that's dropped significantly. One of the problems is it takes a long time to get your grant approved when you're a candidate. It could take months. So I think we need to staff, it's a very small agency that oversees that. They've got maybe a dozen employees, which is okay on, 18 months of the year, or maybe 12 months of a 2-year cycle, but that cycle when we're facing state elections, it's really tight for them. So we need to, we need to beef up it's really a staffing issue over the SEEC. So I think we need to look at that. But we can do better. And I know candidates, especially statewide candidates, got bogged down with issues that weren't fully explained and got caught up in staffing issues over there.
I think the CEP should be protected at all costs. One of the worst decisions I think that the Supreme Court ever put out there was Citizens United, making corporations people and unlimited amounts of dark money flowing into elections. And what happens when you have that kind of outside influence? You, the voters, aren't being represented, but Mr. Corporation is being courted. When the Citizens Elections Program came out, it was a bipartisan program. It did two very positive things. Number one, took the big money out of politics. Number two, it makes your candidates go talk to people and spend time with people. So instead of going into a dark room and asking some large donor to give you a large amount of money, you can go to the everyday voter and say, hey, can you give me $5? Can you give me $10? Or can you give me $100? Nobody's buying influence for $100. I think they bumped it up to $250 last year. But nobody's buying your influence for $250. The program has been very successful. In fact, other states have looked at Connecticut as a model of how we can start getting money out of politics. Because we see what happens in Washington. It's just, who can give you the most gets the most of their congressperson or their representative's ear. When we go out and talk to people in our districts, not only with door knocking, but with asking for your support, it gives the electorate more access to the people that are to be their voice up in Hartford. So it's a great program. I know many years it has been tried to be defunded. It doesn't come from the taxpayers' money. It comes from unclaimed funds. So it's not going to change with your taxes. And it's a great program to make sure that you, the people, get the right representative there. So it's a great program, and I would wholeheartedly support keeping it.
How will you work in your district? I'm sorry.
That's okay. No worries. I'll keep it very brief.
Thank you for keeping me on track.
I was just going to say that Representative Gucker is spot on. That the Citizens Election Program allows us to ask people for votes and not checks. I could have never afforded to run for office if it weren't for this program. And the way it works is you have to raise a certain amount of money, and then the state will match it. I only had to spend 10 days asking people for checks, and the checks were all small amounts, obviously. And then after that, I could go door to door and simply ask for their vote, or better yet, their opinion on this issue and how Hartford could perhaps do better. So it's absolutely crucial to maintain the integrity of our elections, and also making sure that the General Assembly is not just a place for those who are incredibly wealthy and can afford to run their own campaigns. Those who are retired, it should be a representative body. That's the underlying idea of representative democracy. So right now I'm the youngest member of the General Assembly, but I hope that that's not true next time around. I hope that we have a lot of young people who decide to run for office. I hope that we have people from all socioeconomic backgrounds who decide to take that leap. And the Citizens Election Program is what makes that possible. There are so many attempts to remove funding for this program in the Government Administration and Elections Committee. On Monday, we've got a bill that's going to be hard fought to get dark money out of politics. Believe it or not, this is one of the more controversial line items in the budget, but we're going to work really hard to defend it.
Thank you. All right, now, new question. How will you work in your district to promote public understanding of a complete and accurate count for the 2020 census?
be having a meeting tomorrow, I believe at 10:30 at the Danbury Library, discussing this very issue with the mayor of Danbury. To look at how we can do this program properly, make sure that everybody is counted, and make sure that everybody is represented fairly. So going forward, I'm going to work with, our local leaders. What do you need help with? What do you have shortcomings with? Do you need more census takers, don't you? Because the census is extremely important. What people don't seem to realize is that determines how many representatives you get in Washington. That decides where your district lines are. That decides all of your representation. And if we don't have an accurate census, you may lose representation, not gain representation. Because if one town falters and doesn't do a census properly, but a neighboring town shows a huge amount, you will see your district's lines moved all over the place. Many years ago we lost a congressional seat in Washington. We used to have 6 reps, now we have 5. We have to make sure that the census is accurate. We have to make sure those taking the census have the correct information, and make sure that we don't demonize people. Make sure that everybody feels welcome to be able to say, hey, I live here. Look at some of our underperforming neighborhoods where people are kind of in the shadows. Get them out of the shadows. Get them counted accurately so that we keep the representation that we deserve to have. So I will know more tomorrow morning, and if anybody's interested, I believe it's open to the public. I think it's at 10:30 tomorrow morning at the Danbury Library.
In addition to determining representation, it also determines funding from the federal and state government. People constantly refer to census numbers to assess the level of need in a community. That's why we need to make sure not only that every person is counted, but that those underrepresented, those who are often undercounted, in fact, make their voices heard during the census period. We only have one shot every decade to get this right, so we need everybody to roll up their sleeves and make sure that low-income folks and other traditionally marginalized groups really do have a voice as the census is counted and as every single head is accounted for in that process. I'll say briefly that there's a tremendous amount of concern coming down from the federal government that they may impose questions about citizenship on the census. This, I think, is a really bad idea because it will create a lot of fear among undocumented communities that they don't want to answer census questions. As a result, the level of need in that community will be underrepresented on the census, and I just think it's a mistake. It has not historically been the precedent to ask citizenship questions. I think it will intimidate some not to complete the census at all.
Representative Guy.
Well, I think it's been mentioned earlier, the census serves so many purposes. It's really important. I think we mine an incredible amount of data. And yes, we are losing population. We are just losing population, people moving out of the state. However, there are a great deal number of people who are not included for a variety of reasons in the census. I think what's made a difference the last 2 cycles is that we've had neighbors, and we make an effort to get Ridgefielders to conduct the census in Ridgefield. We get residents of Bridgeport to do the census in Bridgeport. So when it's neighbor going to neighbor, it's much less intimidating than it is with someone coming from Washington or out of town or out of state saying, okay, we want this information on you. So I think it's important. That process starts next April 1st, and it's going to deal with the redistricting that takes place the following term. But I think, again, neighbors are neighbors. The best way to get that information accurately and more completely.
Okay. Now, a redistricting question based on the census. How well does Connecticut's current method of redistricting work? Would you support changing Connecticut's redistricting system to an independent, nonpartisan commission? As I understand it now, it's an 8-person redistricting committee with 4 leaders, 2 leaders in the Senate and the 2 leaders in the House, each appoint 2 people, and it's an 8-person body.
Actually 9. So, okay. I haven't been through 2 of these already. So you're right in that we've got, I think, one of the best redistricting policies in the country. The governor has no say in it. The legislative leaders, it's completely nonpartisan. The 2 leaders of each of the caucuses appoint 2 members, and those 8 members select a 9th person. And at least the last 2 times that I've been there, and I think even previously, that 9th person, it's been a Republican, it's been a Democrat, but they pretty much said, I'm not gonna be the 5th vote, I'll be the 9th vote. So you 8 need to agree, and I'll agree, I'll follow along if it's appropriate. So we've had former Democratic speakers of the House, we've had former leaders of the Republican Party, we've had former judges. If the reapportionment committee does not come up with an agreement, which happened 10 years ago, I believe, then it goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court makes the decision. And they can either remand the commission to go back and redraw, or they can actually redraw the districts themselves. We've got a very fair, and it's a model for the country. So these 8 members, 2 from each caucus, select the 9th member, and that's usually been unanimous. And then they take it from there. So we've got actually a very good model in Connecticut.
So you wouldn't be in favor of changing it to an independent, nonpartisan commission?
It's pretty much not, I mean, I think it's worked. I can't point to anything that's worked. We've seen districts go from Republican to Democrat to Republican. We basically take the census number that we've all talked about, and it kind of is what it is. For like Ridgefield's district, for example, so you've got to be within a margin. There's all kinds of rules that the Supreme Court has ruled out, saying that, for instance, you can't have a district that's primarily made up of a certain minority or a certain religious background. It's got to be diverse. In Ridgefield, we're bordered by New York State, so we can't take part of North Salem and put it into the 111th district. And I remember 10 years ago, the districts ended up being about 23,700. The population of Ridgefield was about 25,000. I remember Gail Aviel and John Shaven from Danbury and Jan Giger were saying, we just want a piece of Ridgefield. We'd like to represent part of Ridgefield. And I remember looking at a map and saying, look, geez, if you look at George Washington Highway straight across, that's about the number of people that we need. It was the cleanest way to do it. But it seems to have worked really well. And like I say, it's been a model for other states.
One of the things that I'm finding up in Hartford is you'll find that any of the groups that are dealing with the state are very nonpartisan. So for example, if I need to get some legal information, it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, you get the equal information you need. If you need some policy questions asked, same thing. The way that the districting is done, I believe, has been very nonpartisan. Now, some of it I don't understand. For example, in Danbury, we have 5 state reps in Danbury. I have some state reps that come down from New Fairfield and represent literally 3 neighborhoods in Danbury. I have another state rep that represents Brookfield and has 5 neighborhoods in Danbury. I think they need to look more at population, but also look at the city or the town as a whole. Does that serve them well to have it piecemeal where, where I live, I go 3 blocks away and it's another district. Does that neighbor have a different voice than I do? Now, I talk to everybody anyway, but as far as representation, I think they need to also look at not only population, but look at geographic boundaries as well. So it does make sense. Now, in Ridgefield, you have the blessing of having 2 state reps. So you get twice the voice up in Hartford. But it's pretty well balanced out. I'm not representing 3 neighborhoods, I'm representing 20 neighborhoods. So I think they need to look at the big picture as far as not only the population. I know when Danbury went through redistricting a number of years ago, they couldn't divert by more than, I think it's 3% from what they had. And it worked out very well. And you will find it is very nonpartisan. So as much as they're working on going forward with this, also make sure you have your voices heard on how you feel about the redistricting. And if you don't like the way things are going, make sure you yell at us and yell it out is the key.
I think that the current procedure in Connecticut is okay. I think it's pretty widely regarded as bipartisan. I think it would be better to have it nonpartisan and to actually take individual choice out of it. We're in the 21st century now. There are advanced computer programs that can assess the population of a district and draw pretty sensible lines. And then, of course, a person, probably a judge, should step in and evaluate it. Some other states are looking at that route. I think that something Representative Gucker said that I just want to echo is I wish there were a little bit more cohesion. As we ask people to get involved in state politics, as I went door to door and asked people to think about who their state senator was, a lot of people didn't engage because it was so confusing, the maps. I mean, my district goes from the beaches in Westport all the way up to Bethel with a lot of zigzags in between. I met a voter in Weston the other night, and she said, "Are you my state senator?" I said, "Well, what road do you live on?" And she told me. I said, "Well, which side of the road do you live on?" Because it actually matters. And when it's that complicated, it's hard for people to engage and to know exactly who to call at a moment's notice when something's gone wrong in their neighborhood, when the mail isn't getting delivered or there's a pothole that hasn't been fixed. So I'd like to see in the next round a fair and accurate count first and foremost, but also a little bit more emphasis on towns. And I'm not just saying this because my mom happens to live in a little part of Westport that's not in my district, but I wish that the unity of towns had a greater priority in the redistricting process.
If I can just add, unfortunately, I remember going through this last time, because I really didn't want to give up any part of Ridgefield. The town boundary is not a primary factor in determining the boundaries of the district. And as Ken mentioned, it's either 3 or 5% the variable. So the lower the district size, so we have 151 members in the State House. We've had that since the 1960s. That's not set in stone. They could make that smaller or larger, larger or smaller. Same thing in the Senate. We've got 36. We've had that for a long time. But each time, I'm not sure the powers that be determined that, okay, we're going to stick with that number. So we have. But it seems to, like I say, it seems to have worked out pretty well. I don't think, if someone calls me from the north side of Canterbury Lane, I don't, check on the voter list and see whether they're in my district or not, or on Keeler Drive, or the certain side of George Washington Highway, which is in Ken's district. It really makes no difference to me, and I'm sure it doesn't to Ken either, and I'm sure Will's the same way.
Okay, those were the warm-up questions. Do you support tolls? And if so, should the fees be restricted to commercial vehicles only?
Can you speak into
Can you
the
speak
mic?
into-
All right, yeah, I'm sorry. Do you support tolls? And if so, should the fees be restricted to commercial vehicles only? It's the toll question. Senator Haskell.
Okay, I think I'm the odd man out on this panel, but I will say that I actually do support the concept of tolling. I voted for it in the Transportation Committee last week, not because I like tolls, I don't think anybody likes paying tolls, but because we're the only state between Maine and North Carolina that isn't asking the drivers to contribute. And you can say, well, yeah, they're contributing to the gas tax, and we have gas taxes that are too high, and I'd agree with you. If we put in place tolls, I think we should bring down gas taxes, which are regressive, and right now your gas is taxed twice in Connecticut. There's a wholesale and a retail tax. I think that's wrong. So we can have conversations about how to make this affordable, but right now we're leaving money on the table at a time when we just can't afford to do so. Some people say, oh, tolls are dangerous, there is a major crash, but if you've traveled anywhere along the East Coast, you know that you can fly under tolls and largely not even notice that you're going under them. The tolling proposal that we have before us, I think, sets the right tone in terms of fairness for Connecticut drivers. It's a 30% discount if you have a Connecticut Easy Pass, and an additional 20% discount if you're a commuter, meaning you travel under a gantry more than 20 times a month. Connecticut is a geographic hotspot between Boston and New York. You really can't avoid this state, whether you're a trucking company or whether you're somebody who's just traveling up and down the East Coast, and yet we're giving them a free ride. It doesn't make us uniquely advantaged as taxpayers. I think it makes us uniquely disadvantaged because we all bear the brunt of funding our infrastructure. There's pretty much nobody in Hartford that claims, Republican or Democrat, that claims with a straight face that our transportation infrastructure is doing just fine, right? Everybody agrees that we have to make major investments and improvements. The train from my district to Manhattan has gotten slower since 1950, not faster. We have 308 structurally deficient bridges according to the Department of Transportation. Where we differ is how to fund those improvements. And the tolling proposal says, yeah, Connecticut drivers are going to have to pay 60%, but out-of-state drivers and trucking companies will contribute the other 40%. I think it's a pretty good deal compared to the alternative, which is let's bond it out, let's not pay anything right now, but we'll charge it to our children and grandchildren, and they're not only gonna have to pay the full brunt of the construction costs, but also interest on those debt services. That's what Hartford's been doing for decades. That's why 13% of our budget right now is consumed by debt services. For years, the political expedient thing to do has been to not ask the current taxpayers to contribute and instead charge it to the next generation. And I think that cycle of short-sightedness has to stop.
Well, I don't support tolls. I'm not philosophically opposed to tolls. You know, if we had to, say, redo the Mixed Master, that big spaghetti-looking bridge thing in Waterbury, and we had to put a $5 or $6 toll to help fund that, yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to that per se. But Governor Moy proposed 82 tolls, which would have been the most in the country. Governor Lamont ran on trucks only. Now he's proposed 52 tolls in the state. It would be the most in New England. So look, I've studied tolls for at least 12 years in Connecticut. I was ranked member of the Transportation Bonding Committee for 8 years. It's a topic I'm really familiar with. Massachusetts has 14 tolls on the Massachusetts Turnpike, plus 3 tolls outside the city of Boston. Massachusetts has a population of nearly double the size of Connecticut. They collect $347 million in tolls, they did as of 2 years ago. The exits on the Mass Pike are 30 miles apart. What they want to do in Connecticut is raise 6 cents per mile and have tolls every 6 miles. So pretty much every town between Danbury and Hartford would have a toll. Likewise, every town between I-95 between Greenwich and New Haven. So in I-95, you've got a toll every mile. So you have people who aren't traveling 30 miles to their job. They're getting groceries. If you live in Stanford, you go shop at Whole Foods in Darien, you're going to pay a toll. So what's not as practical in Connecticut, and keep in mind that we currently do receive money from trucks. We get almost $100 million a year from trucks, number one. Number two, if you don't have an easy pass, you would get a photo taken of your driver's registration and you'd be sent the bill. That costs me $1.10 and $1.40 to send out. We'd be collecting about 36 cents on that toll. So we'd be looking at a significant loss each time we were sending out a bill without easy pass. So there's some really big faults with the 52 toll plan that we're facing in Connecticut. Yes, we have 300 failing bridges. It's a matter of prioritizing. Governor Lamont, we put in last year, 2 years before I think, car taxes for new cars that would include electric vehicles that would go into the Special Transportation Fund. And Governor Lamont has decided to take that out in the current budget. So he's actually forcing us into a deficit situation in the Special Transportation Fund. He's indicated a willingness to work with the legislature. I hope that's the case. If I had to guess today, I don't think tolling would pass today the way it's been proposed. Although we've got 2 months before the session ends and a lot can change. The other thing is we wouldn't see $1 for 7 years, at least 6 years, maybe 7 years. It costs 10% of the funding of the tolling revenue to collect the tolls. So we're looking at $800 million. And by the way, New York State, as of 2 years ago, collected $740 million in tolls. We want to collect $800 million. I could drive to Montreal and not pay a toll. I could drive to Times Square and not pay a toll. Yet I wouldn't be able to drive to Costco in Brookfield without paying 2 tolls. Yes, we've heard this before, that you can't drive up and down the northeast seaboard without paying tolls, but not the kind of tolls we have in Connecticut. And not with the 4th highest gas tax in the nation as well. So there's a lot of factors to it, but I haven't seen the toll proposal that I care for.
I myself am not in favor of tolls, and I think I said that in this room. When we talk about the truck-only tolling that was first put on the table, they're finding out in Rhode Island that may not be legal to do that. There's a lawsuit in Rhode Island that you're singling out, so we can't do that. So everybody gets hit with tolls as we put them up. How do we break it down? Now, I want to see where they're going to put the tolls, because it's not what the Yankee Institute says, which is every single side street, road, bridge, you know, up 7, down 7, up 8, down this one. It's not. I actually got a call from the governor last week and said you really need to put out to the public where you're thinking about doing this. It's not every mile, because between, if that was the case, between Danbury and here, I would have gone through, what, 8 tolls to get here? First of all, structurally, it's unsound, because what would it cost to put those gantries up every mile? You would not collect enough revenue on it. Number 2, they're looking at doing them on I-84, 95, and 91. The merit has been up and down. 7 is out of the picture, Route 8 is out of the picture, a lot of the other northern ends are out of the picture. So we really need to see exactly where they're talking about. The governor's budget, when it comes to the legislature, is basically dead on arrival. That budget is this thick. You know, and the day after the governor did his speech in front of the General Assembly, everybody was jumping up and down, oh my God, it's horrible. Nobody is that quick of a reader to read something that thick, and it's like the most boring reading you will ever do in your life. Nobody read it, you know, so I think a lot of this has to do we have a problem with financing? Yes. How do we fix our roads? I'm not exactly sure at this point. I don't like the bonding aspect, but I also don't support the tolls. I think that just disproportionately burdens commuters. I had asked here in this room last fall, if you were going to do tolls, then maybe you do like a rebate back to the people that are using, that live in this state, so that the people who are already paying for these roads and bridges aren't getting hit a second time. They're finding it's not going to be enough revenue. So again, I oppose the tolls. I don't see a plan that works at this point. But I also don't buy into the fear-mongering that's going on, that every 50 feet there's going to be another toll. We need to really see where they're thinking about putting this. They need to do a study and find out what works, and then take another look at it.
Do you support school regionalization? There are 3 bills now, Senate Bill 457, Senate Bill 738, and Senate Bill 874. How do you feel about school regionalization? Do you see any positive aspect to school regionalization? Senator Haskell.
Sure.
I get to start with all the fun questions. So it was, I have to say, a little bit trial by fire on the school regionalization issue. I was in my first month, and all of a sudden there was this proposal from the leader of my own party that would force school districts to regionalize. Part of the reason that our communities are so wonderful, the reason that people want to live in Ridgefield, the reason my family chose to live in Westport, is because we have such wonderful schools, and I would never support anything that would undermine the high quality of our public schools. Education is and has always been a matter of local control in Connecticut, and that's part of the secret to success, I think. So I think within 4 hours of the Senate President proposing his bill, I issued a statement along with a few other Democrats who represent Fairfield County saying we are not going to vote for this. We are going to put our districts above our party, because ultimately we work for the voters who sent us to Hartford, not for any leader of any particular political party. That was an easy one for me. Then the governor's proposal came along, and there was a lot of political pressure to just say no, like I had to the last one. Just say no to every single regionalization bill. And I understand why it was certainly politically tempting, but I am a believer in working collaboratively and trying to stay in the room and at the negotiating table. I think that sometimes my district is best served when I do have a seat at that table, and as we try to craft a better bill, a more fair bill to this community. And I called the governor multiple times. He and I had a few good conversations. I said, you know what, you have to come down to my district and talk to the municipal leaders about this proposal. He came down to Weston the next day, had a long meeting with all of the first selectmen in my district. Ultimately, I think that the strategy worked, because the next week he announced major revisions that stress incentivized school regionalization. It doesn't force the town to do anything. The bill that made it out of committee yesterday it was successfully so watered down, it's really just a study that looks at how districts can share back office services if they're very small and have declining student enrollment. There's only one district that I represent that would be impacted by this because it is fewer than 2,000 students. That's the town of Reading. So I called up Reading right away. There's first selectman, their superintendent, their board of ed chair. I said, what do you think of this bill? They said, we already do all of this stuff. They share a superintendent with Easton, and they share back office administration because they want to spend money where it counts, which is in the classroom. The role of the state should not be forcing a town to do anything. If a very small school district with 400 students wants to have their own superintendent, God bless them, that should be it's their freedom to do so. But if they want to regionalize, if they want to share those administrators so that they can spend more money on teachers and more money on school supplies and more money on students, then the state should help facilitate a way that back office functions can be easily shared. And I think that's what we see coming out of this study. The state is going to give towns the tools that they need to voluntarily regionalize if they choose to do so. And voluntary is the key word. So going forward, that's what I'll be advocating for.
Well, when I'm not in the legislature, I sell real estate. And there's one reason why people move to Ridgefield. It's because of our schools. Now, there's a couple other reasons. There's a bunch of other reasons why. We've got a beautiful Main Street, we're historic, we've got the arts, we've got a whole host of other reasons. But the one predominant reason is our school system is above none. And I trust our local Board of Education with making those decisions. I don't support school regionalization. You know, I had an open house at a beautiful new construction home up off 116 3 weeks ago, and a couple came from Brewster. And he was 45 years old, he had an 8-year-old daughter, and his wife was there, and he's like, John, I gotta tell you, I love this house, brand new house, love this house. But we're moving here to get our daughter into the Ridgefield schools, and if I don't have a guarantee she's gonna go to Ridgefield schools, we're putting our plans on hold. And I've spoken to, I won't call a banker, but I've spoken to agents at every office in town with their clients to talk them off the edge. I'm speaking at a competitor's office this week because we are losing transactions in Ridgefield because of the school regionalization, pure and simple. I had a meeting with Governor Lamont on February 14th. He knew that I did real estate. He was like, oh, John, what's real estate like in Ridgefield? I said, well, Governor sucks. We're down 50% in value in cases from 2008, which was our peak. Because now it can't be. Yeah, it is. I gave 3 examples. And he said, oh. And he turned around and walked away. So I do have a meeting scheduled with him this week. But it's a problem. I don't support, you know, we have voluntary regionalization. Tom McMorrin, who we're in Boy Choir together, he's from Ridgefielder. He's a Ridgefielder. He's superintendent of schools in Region 9, Joe Barlow, and Easton and Reading. We can do school regionalization. We can do other regionalization. We can do animal control regionalization. We can do dispatch regionalization. We can do other things. Stanford's got a combined back office between the finance areas of the town and the schools. So there are things that we can do. But when I hear about we're going to do it with carrots and with less sticks, there should be no sticks. As Will and I were talking about, yesterday was the Education Committee deadline. And the good news is that they took out, good news, bad news, because the legislature still is 2 months ahead. But they took out the idea of the towns being responsible for teachers' pensions, to pension costs. So that was stripped out of the governor's proposal yesterday. But that would then go to the Appropriations Committee, and we have to cobble together a budget, and that could be very well be part of it. And his concept of regionalization, although they don't call it regionalization, is still in there. It costs $1 million. It becomes a study, which again, when we had the rally at the front steps of Town Hall, my concern was that regionalization wouldn't happen this year, but it would become a study, then it would become a pilot program. And I see that coming down the pipe. So potentially, it may not. Hopefully it doesn't. But it's a big concern for districts like Ridgefield and districts across the state.
So one of the things with regionalization, and I also represent, and in my district, is the largest high school in the state of Connecticut, it's Danbury High School. All right, 53 languages are spoken here. You're not going to see Danbury regionalizing with anybody, because they pretty much are at capacity at this point. In fact, they're looking for rooms to expand. I mean, the freshman academy that was added on about a year ago was pretty much obsolete when they finished and cut the ribbon, saying, yeah, well, that was great, now we need more. So, I think the idea of regionalization was kind of, people were thinking about putting your kids in a bus and we're going to ship you to somewhere else. It's a bad idea, but the thing that I did hear from the selectmen, many of the selectmen and many of the school superintendents that I agreed with is why couldn't we regionalize, say, buying our textbooks, buying our computers, our legal services for the unfunded mandates that get proposed from Hartford that we have to deal with. Why should we have 169 different attorneys looking at the same piece of paper? Why can't we just get one? Pay the one, everybody gets that. Why can't we have, say, Ridgefield, Danbury, New Fairfield, Bethel, all buy from the same book vendor? Okay, we all have the same history class. We're going to buy X amount of history books. Boom, we get it at a discounted rate. I mean, you know, when you go to Costco or any of these other warehouse stores, the more you buy, the lower the price goes down. Now, the regionalization idea really was being pushed towards the quiet corner of Connecticut. I mean, if you look at the population, for example, in my district, it's a long strip. But like I said earlier, if you go up to, say, Canaan, Connecticut and such, they have miles and miles and miles of district. You listen to some of these state reps when they say, well, what towns do you get? And they roll out this long white paper and they read off all these towns because it's by population. In those towns want to do some sort of regionalization because it doesn't make sense. They're losing population, their school sizes are going down, and they're looking at, well, maybe small towns could put their stuff together. I know the town of Sherman. You know, I grew up in New Fairfield, I spent a lot of time in Sherman. They don't have a high school. So their kids either go to New Fairfield High School or they go to New Guilford High School. So these are the things they're talking about doing there. But sadly, when these bills come out, it affects everybody. You know, so that's why it's important to really look at the fine line, really look at the fine print, and look at where they're trying to go with it. I don't think you're going to see them pushing for schools to consolidate together, but possibly services, expenses, things like that. Another bill that came up about was bus service for private schools. Like Danbury has a number of private schools, but they use the Danbury bus service to where they wanted to cut that out. But then you're disproportionately not helping some of the taxpayers that are paying for a school system that they don't use, but maybe having their schedule be the same as your regular school schedule. So maybe Danbury High School is closed, but St. Gregory's is open, that you have them on the same schedule, so you're not pulling out a bus to go make a special trip through the neighborhood just to get people to these schools. Those, I think, are where the cost cutting needs to be, and I think that's what they're trying to do with this, is with this idea of regionalization. So services, supplies, things that we all need, but it doesn't affect the character of the town. It doesn't affect the reason why you moved from the town. But hey, if you can knock a few $1,000s off your Board of Ed budget, we could start fixing some potholes.
One last question. Start with Representative Frey. Will you sponsor legislation to ban ghost guns and to regulate storage of guns in homes?
I have sponsored a ban on ghost gun bills, and let me just see here on my list. Safe storage. I did one. There's two safe storage guns. One is in a motor vehicle. One is in a home. I've so far co-sponsored the one in the motor vehicle. I've not yet co-sponsored one in the home, but I'm open to doing that. I haven't seen that yet. But I have sponsored ghost gun bills, and my ghost gun bill, I've introduced that in the last 3 years. My ghost gun bill, there was like 12 that were proposed. Mine was not the one that was advanced. However, I have, of course, co-sponsor the one that is against the system.
I'm a co-sponsor on all three of those bills. I think I said it here. I have a personal connection with what happened in Sandy Hook. A good friend of mine, sister was in the building that day. She's one of the teachers that lives with the effects of that day every day. In fact, I give her a lot of credit for going back to work in that school system. I have other friends of mine who are teachers in neighboring towns who now live with that fear. They're constantly walking around with their cell phone in one hand and their keys in the other hand, waiting for if that alarm goes off. Ghost guns, if you're making a ghost gun, you're obviously doing it for one reason. It's not cheap to make a ghost gun. It means that you can't get a gun under normal circumstances. So do you really deserve a gun? It circumvents all of our background checks. It circumvents the safeties that we put in place. You know, and sadly, many of the laws that get put into place are reactions to something that has happened. We never put bills or laws out there saying, you know, maybe somebody might do this, let's put a law out to make sure it doesn't happen. It's usually in a reaction. The safe storage laws, Ethan's law. That's the safe storage in houses. You know, you had a family member who was open to guns, who didn't have a problem with the Second Amendment, didn't have a problem, but unbeknown to them, the neighbor was playing with their father's gun that wasn't locked up, a loaded gun. And a tragedy occurred. You know, safe storage in your car. It makes sense. I mean, I've gotten letters from people saying, you're taking away my rights. Look, if I have a gun, which I don't, but if I had a gun, and I had to leave it in my car, do you think it's smart not to lock it up? What if somebody breaks into that car, takes your gun, does something nefarious with it, and leaves it? Whose fingerprints are on it? Who's the gun registered? Whose is that? It's yours, so it makes sense. If you're gonna leave your gun in your car, lock it up, put it in the trunk, do something, lock it up so that it can't be seen unwrapped. Same thing in your house. I mean, if we had had safe storage in Newtown, we wouldn't have had Newtown. All right? These are common sense laws. They take nothing away from anybody's rights. It's just called being a responsible gun owner. And if you talk to most gun owners, they agree with responsible gun ownership. So I'm a co-sponsor on all three of those bills. It's personal to me, and I could not sleep at night knowing that we did not pass some of these safety laws and then know that somebody in my community suffered for it. So that's my opinion.
Thank you so much for this question. Gun violence prevention is certainly, if not my top priority, one of my top priorities in the time that I have to serve in Hartford. I am a member of the Judiciary Committee. I'm a co-sponsor on just about every gun violence prevention bill, including the ones you mentioned. Ghost guns is pretty clear, and everybody's probably heard about these. You shouldn't be able to order a gun over the internet in multiple parts and have it arrive in your home without a serial number, without any identity check, where you can assemble it and use it in nefarious ways without having undergone that background check. But the safe storage law is something I did not know all that much about until I had the honor of meeting the family that Representative Gucker mentioned, and that's the Song family in Guilford. Ethan was a 15-year-old boy who went over to his friend's house, and the father had a gun that was stored very unsafely, but completely legally. That's because in Connecticut, if the gun isn't actually loaded, you don't have to put it in a safe. But the bullets were right next to the gun, and the two teenagers didn't have a hard time figuring out how to load the gun. They were just playing around, but unfortunately, Ethan shot himself and lost his life. Since then, Kristen and Mike Song have just become unbelievably tireless and brave advocates. My colleagues will tell you these hearings go on really late at night, and you don't have to stay till the end of the hearing if you're not the committee chair. Many times, people will listen to the rest of it on Channel 59 or in the car on their drive home. I kept thinking about leaving the Judiciary Committee hearing as it was stretching on and on and on, and so many folks came from the CCDL, which is a reputable organization that defends the Second Amendment, but they were saying, the Second Amendment protects my right to store my gun however I choose. And first of all, I don't know where in the Second Amendment it says you can put a gun in a cardboard box under your bed or in your drawer in the bedside table. I see the word as well regulated in the Second Amendment, but But more importantly, every time I thought about leaving, I saw Kristen Song sitting in the back of the room with her arms crossed, and just imagining the trauma and the heartbreak that she must go through now months after her son lost his life, just watching folks testify against the bill that ultimately would have saved Ethan's life. It's an incredibly emotional issue. It's an incredibly important issue. It's also, frankly, empirically proven that we can save lives with this. The American Association of Pediatrics has said that when you store guns safely, the incidence of child suicide or accidental death go down by 73%. I hear all the time from those who, use guns regularly, saying the problem isn't those who legally hold guns, it's when guns fall into the wrong hands. And I agree, we want to prevent guns from falling into the wrong hands. Study after study shows that many of those guns that end up on the black market that are used in criminal ways, often in Connecticut cities, were stolen in the first place, or they were purchased as a part of a straw purchase. That's why I also introduced a bill that says an individual can only buy one gun per month, because if you go into a gun dealer and buy 30 guns, the chance that you're going to use those in a criminal manner, or I shouldn't say that, the chance that those guns will be used in a criminal manner dramatically increases, because you're likely going to sell them into the hands of somebody who wouldn't pass a background check. So those three bills that you mentioned are a great starting place, but I also think we have a lot more to do to prevent gun violence, and I think that voters in Ridgefield that I met, voters in every one of the towns that I represent, are really looking for moral leadership and bravery in standing up on some of these really tough issues in country.
Thank you, Representative Gucker, Representative Frey. So that concludes the week questions. Your turn.
Make a straight line right through here. I just
And
want,
pertaining to matters before the Connecticut General Assembly.
we'd like to emphasize that, remaining to Connecticut General Assembly. I'd also like to thank the legislators very much for their very complex answers, and as you see, we have a lot of folks in mind, so if we could ask the questioners not to make comments, but to go right to their question. We appreciate that you feel very strongly about your question, but folks aren't going to be able to ask their question if we have a lot of commentary on it. So again, I will remind you, I will very politely but firmly ask you to wrap it up if things get a little long. And I might ask the legislators to do the same, because we really need to get to all the folks. So here you go.
From what I understand, LGBTQ legislation, HB 6219, regarding safe bathrooms for gender nonconforming students, and SB 58 to ban gay and trans panic defense are not moving forward this session. Senator Haskell, as you are on the Judiciary and Education committees, will you propose these next session? And Representative John Frey and Gucker, will you co-sponsor them?
Could you please state your name, please?
Ava
Thank
Trachtenberg.
you. All right.
Thank you so much for that question. I'm a co-sponsor on both of those bills. I don't know if it's ruled out that they're not going to move forward this session, because the Judiciary Committee deadline isn't for another few weeks. We heard the testimony yesterday, in fact, on gay and transgender panic defense. This is a law I had no idea existed, but it can actually be claimed, according to outdated Connecticut statutes, that if you're so shocked that somebody comes out to you, you can use that as a defense in homicide. It's unbelievable. I'm not sure that it's ever actually been claimed in court, certainly not in the 21st century, but it's offensive that it's even on the books, and we're working to get rid of it. The testimony was really quite remarkable yesterday. So the jury's not out on this session. If it doesn't get through this year, I'll certainly be glad to introduce a co-sponsor in that session.
Representative Frey.
Yeah. So when we spoke yesterday to your mom, I was looking online, and it had not yet been reported because the public hearing was yesterday. I find it hard to believe that. I mean, that's a hate crime. I find it hard to believe that could be defense in that type of case. So I would support that bill.
Would you co-sponsor?
Yes. What was the second bill again?
The second bill was about the second bill is about the non-conforming, the bathrooms for gender non-conforming students, and also expanding it to elementary, not just middle school and high school.
Before we commit to that, I want to hear from the town, what that would do. I know we have them in the middle school, so I'd be inclined to think the town's be in favor of it. I just want to double
We have
check.
it in the high school here, not in middle school yet, and it's just changing the sign.
I know we do have one of these grids that I've seen.
It's not uniform.
Yeah, perhaps not. But I'm meeting with the Board of Ed next week, so I'd like to get their input on that. But I'm not close-minded to that.
The same. The other thing I would also mention to yourself and others, there were over 3,000 bills that were put in this year. My committees did not talk about any of these. In fact, this is sadly is the first time I'm hearing about these bills. So I implore anybody who has any other bills that you haven't heard from us, please let us know, because that's how we find out. We have bills, anything from this to shark fins to licensing cats. I mean, it's been all over the place. So I would have no problem supporting those.
Yeah. Okay, really
Really
short.
short, really short.
That's clarifying, sorry. In terms of hate crimes, is there any chance that in the future you can propose co-sponsor legislation to extend the statute of limitations on hate crimes in general? Because only, I think it's 18 months right now.
Anyone?
Yes.
I think that's really interesting. I'd love to talk to you more about it, because I didn't realize that the statute of limitations was that short, but it's something we should take a look at next session.
I'd be the same. I thought we lengthened hate crimes longer than 18 months, but maybe there are certain situations. That we can talk to you about that.
Next question, please.
Yes, thank you for being here. My name is James Russell. I live in Ridgefield many years. And House Bill 5898, a compassionate terminal patient's right to die bill, may be coming up for a vote on Monday. If it passes out of the Public Health Committee, I would like to know how you would vote on this bill. And for those of you who don't know, this would allow, say, a terminal cancer patient with less than 6 months left to live, in a great deal of pain and suffering, to be able to peacefully and comfortably end their lives with pills provided by a doctor, surrounded by friends and family. I'd like to know how you would vote on this bill. Thank you.
Sure. I would be interested in hearing your personal experience with that in more detail privately. I've heard both sides, and it's an issue that we've been discussing for a number of years in Hartford. It's never come before a vote. It's not a committee that I served on. I see both sides of that issue. I spoke to some local doctors in town, I spoke to someone about this earlier, who said, okay, if you take 2 of these pills, it's going to give you relief. If you take 15 of these pills in a bottle of 30, you're going to go to sleep, you're not going to wake up. Then there's the issues of someone who maybe can't take the pills for themselves. Maybe they've got ALS, so they're still in mind. I had that in my family. So they're still mentally capable, but they're no longer physically able to. Maybe they can't even swallow. So it's a complicated issue. Honestly, I wish it was one that wasn't before 187 members of the public to decide. But I'd like to hear both sides of the story. So I'm not closed-minded on that issue. I see both sides of it. So I'd love to see, I did hear from a woman this morning about her experience and her family. I would like to hear of yours, and we can talk about that afterwards. I would appreciate that.
I watched my grandmother die of cancer. It was one of the most horrific things I've ever had to watch. Watching a woman who was very articulate, very smart, very present, turn into a vegetable. She was also had requested that, as that time went on, that she would not be resuscitated or put on machinery. The hospital ignored her, which is prolonged her suffering another month or so. I have also gotten many emails on this. Most of the people that are against this that I hear are mostly from religious communities. I myself wouldn't have a problem supporting this fund. I would like to see more information on it. You know, and I'm sure many of the religious community will be upset with me for saying that, but honestly, if you're against this idea, then don't do it. You know, don't do it. You know, leave people to make their own decisions. We do need to put some sort of law in place, though, because we run the risk that if somebody, like the good representative said, has to assist somebody with this, are they guilty of murder charges or things of that sort? You know, for following through on the wishes or the last wishes of their partner. So we need to do something in that regard. We need to make it clear. You know, and any law can be taken out of context or be done for the wrong reasons, but I think this is something that has to do with our compassion. And like I said, I personally have lived through it, and it's not something that I would wish on my worst.
This is such a difficult topic to talk about. I don't serve on the Public Health Committee, but I wish that I did, because what I've heard is that they're a few votes short. One vote short, is that right? That is so frustrating to me, because I've heard from so many constituents that they need this compassionate legislation. As I understand it, and in the last draft that I read, it has strong protections against abuse and any misuse. It says, most importantly, that the patient has to be of sound mind. They must have a terminal illness with 6 months left to live. They have to request it twice in writing and go to 2 different doctors for approval. In New Jersey just did this recently. We hear from families story after story. I listened really closely to the testimony, even though I'm not on that committee. So many of my patients so many of my constituents who do have terminal illnesses came to testify. The doctors came, and I believe the consensus of the medical community is now engage neutrality. They're not opposed to this bill. They recognize that somebody should be able to define how they live that last chapter in their life. They should be able to pass in a dignified and peaceful manner, and that's not what we're doing right now. So I hope that the committee, that one vote will swing on Monday, but I'm not confident.
Who is that one vote?
Could be any.
So just to clarify, that it was on the agenda yesterday in Public Health Committee. It was not called to a vote because it was one short. We don't know, because there was not a vote taken who the one is. Their deadline is Monday, so there's one more crack at it. Doesn't mean that it's over if it doesn't pass the committee. It could come up as an amendment or later on in the budget implementer or something else down the road. Well, implementer probably didn't happen. But it doesn't mean that it's over. But it's got one shot to make it easier on Monday. So what I would do is go online, check out who the members are of the Public Health Committee. None of them will serve on that. But there's about 20 members of that committee. And shoot them an email over the weekend to say how important it is to you and your experience.
Next question, please.
Thank you for your time this afternoon, this morning. My name is Thomas Olkowski. I'm a CPA and tax accountant. At this time of year, taxes are on my mind. How do you feel today? There's a number of bills that are components where there's what I would call hidden taxes that are included as part of whether that's tolls, whether that's payroll tax to fund family paid leave, which it seems people aren't really paying attention to. How do you look at the back-ended approvals process for the payroll, specifically the payrolls tax to fund family paid leave, which I'm sympathetic to, but it can go up to 0.5% of payroll on all taxpayers, where if the amount of funding is not received based on that payroll, it goes back and it can be back-ended approved if there's no vote taken on. That's seems like a silent representation on how things are funded. And sorry, I'm a little bit nervous, but silent representation there that we continue to have bills that have no votes taken on them, but can just get passed in this legislature.
I hear you on the paid family leave and how we're funding it. I wouldn't say there's widespread agreement, but I certainly feel strongly, and many of the folks I talk to feel strongly, that it's wrong. We're the only advanced country in the world that doesn't offer paid family leave. It's not just bad for children. Most importantly, vaccination rates go up when we offer paid family leave. Early childhood brain development benefits tremendously when parents have time to take off of work to bond with their children. but it's also good for business. In California, when they implemented paid family leave, 89% of businesses reported an increase or no effect on profitability, 91% of businesses reported an increase or no effect on productivity. But there's two visions for how to fund this thing, and one is to ask employers to pay their employees while they take that leave, and the other is to ask the employees to dutifully contribute in the form of their paychecks. I'm a big advocate, even though it is 0.5% on your payroll taxes, for pursuing an employee-funded paid family leave, because I think it would be a burden on businesses to ask them to pay for that paid family leave policy. There's not a consensus, it's not a Democrat-Republican thing as far as I can tell. There are some Democrats who want it to be entirely employer-funded. They want the bosses to have to pay for the few weeks that a mother or father might take. I view it as sort of operating in the same way as Social Security disability. The leave, you don't have to take that leave, but if you decide to do so, that the option's available for you because you've been saving up and dutifully contributing over the years. I hear you that it's not the best thing in the world, but we are going to vote on it. It's not going to happen silently. Paid family leave is SB1, and I think that signals it might be one of the very first things that the Senate acts on. And if we're voting on it, we're not just voting on the concept of paid family leave, but also how to fund it.
As mentioned earlier, I serve on the Finance Committee. We're starting public hearings in the next week or 10 days. There are a whole host of tax increases. Family medical leave is one. Sales tax on your industry, on my industry. Sales tax on bicycle helmets and car seats and newspapers. And there's a whole litany of things that are included. Removing the auto tax, which is, I never thought that was really fair, but at least it stays within the town. We cut about $8 million a year in revenue from the auto tax. There's a proposal now that goes to the state. We may get back $1 million of that $8 million, which means we need to make that up somewhere else. So there's a whole host of tax increases that, chip away, make us less competitive. So the public hearings are going to start on that in the next 2 weeks. By May 1st, we'll be completed on that.
I think the fundamental ideas of paid family leave is a necessity at this point. Now, how do we get there? Originally, it was proposed it's going to be the employee, takes care of this. I've met with, the other question has also been how do we administrate it? So I've had insurance industries that are actually interested in taking over this to where maybe it is not the state taking care of it, possibly an independent organization that does this to make sure that the resources and such go where they're supposed to go. There's also been a question of an opt-out. If your employer has a better plan than what you're going to offer. At this point, that's on the table. So there's a lot of moving pieces that haven't been decided. As far as all these these other taxes we talked about, again, the governor's budget, they threw everything on the table. We need to deal with years and years of mismanagement. We need to deal with years and years of kicking the can down the road. So they threw everything on the table. And if anybody's done any kind of negotiating, you don't start with your best offer right in front. You start with everything on the table and you negotiate down to what you want. If you're going to sell your car on your front lawn, you have to get $2,500 for it. You don't start at $1,800. You start at $3,000 and work your way down. That's what they're working at. Most of these taxes that they're putting out there, when we had the fear of grocery tax and prescription tax, that was never going to happen. They threw everything on the table to say, this is what we have, this is what we're looking at, let's parse it down, let's hear from the people what affects them the most, and let's work at it. Like I said earlier, the governor's budget is that thick. Nobody's going by that. The legislature is looking at some of it, but they're making their own budget. So let's see what comes out of these various committees. Let's see what are the pieces we need to work with, and we'll go from there.
Good morning, my name is Roger Restano from Ridgefield. This is about gun control issues, predominantly before the Judiciary Committee, but I appreciate everybody responding. As you know, 4 bills did advance, gun violence related bills, some of the topics already mentioned today. 2 did not advance though, as far as I know, and I think there's still time before the Judiciary Committee for this. One having to allow pistol permit holders to carry a handgun for self-defense in state parks and forests. and another one would really prohibit individual towns and cities from making their own gun control laws in Connecticut, which is the situation today. So on these two topics, it does not seem to be falling into gun violence prevention compared possibly to the other four bills. As a matter of fairness, though, to ask responsible gun owners to accept changes, whether they agree or not, we could say that's okay. But on these two topics, they don't seem to be gun violence related. They would seem to be logical under law. So could you comment, Will, where these two bills still stand in the Judiciary Committee? And just as a general comment from you all, the fairness of this issue. Thank you.
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Roger, for being here. I will say the two bills that you mentioned, we had a public hearing on, and we haven't had a vote, so I can't speak for my colleagues about the livelihood of those bills, if they're going to survive. I think we might be having some votes on all gun-related measures next week, so I'll be sure to let you know if that happens. But I will say that the guns in state parks, I'm going to be a no vote. I think that people should be able to feel incredibly safe when they're at state parks. I grew up right around the corner from Sherwood Island State Park. It's one of the great places that I remember going to in my childhood. And I think that there are spaces available for those who really enjoy using guns, whether it's a gun range or whether it's areas and times of year that are permitted for hunting. I don't think we have to open up state parks to that feeling of insecurity that comes from some people when they're simply around guns. On the other one, I'm interested in this bill. For those who didn't hear, it would prohibit municipalities from enacting their own gun regulations. I would like to, I wish that municipalities, I wish that the state didn't have to enact gun regulation. I wish it were coming from the federal government. I think that it should be uniform, but unfortunately, there's a lot of inaction in the national scene around gun violence prevention, and the state has stepped up to the plate. And for years, when the state didn't really act, because the tradition in Hartford, as I understand it, was that the Judiciary Committee would do one gun violence prevention bill per year. This year, we're doing 4, which is pretty remarkable, and I think it comes from the strong signal that we sent in the most recent election. But still, there's some inaction on the state level, and municipalities that really want to fight gun violence are stepping up and enacting their own laws. I was interested to hear from gun owners who were traveling through municipalities and wanted to stop for gas that they couldn't reasonably be expected to know the local regulations. It's a bill that I'm going to take a close look at and see if we can find some common ground, whether it's posting, whether it's exemptions for those who are on the highway. I'd like to, I am sympathetic to those who are traveling with a gun and want desperately to follow the law, but can't constantly be sure that they're in line with local municipal regulations. So I promise to take a close look at that, but I'm a no on this state parks one.
Would you mind repeating quickly the state park one?
Currently on the DEEP regulations, a certified pistol permit holder cannot carry his firearm in a state park, despite what the state constitution says, which is even clearer than the federal Second Amendment.
Okay.
And I'm not referring to Sherwood Island Beach, Will. I'm talking about remote state forests where I'm hiking miles from any type of law enforcement support and that sort of matter. So there's more than just the beach in Westport as part of the state park system.
Yeah, I think it's got to be differential. I know Senator Duff has proposed that one down on the shoreline in Westport or area. I think that's different. When we purchased the Bennett's Farm, which now becomes state park, the state decided to kick in, I think, about $4.5 million. One of the main reasons they did it was for wildlife management, and they do allow hunting in that park. That money clearly would not have been available if wildlife management were not part of that. So,
this is about pistol permit holders, not hunting.
Correct. So I'd have to find out more on that. Like I say, I'm not out sure of judiciary.
That's Senate Bill 940 if you want to take a look.
940. Yeah, obviously, hunting doesn't take place with pistols. As far as the other goes, I think Connecticut's too small of a state to have 169 different laws. We're not Texas, we're not a large state, so I think we need to be uniform in our laws.
I'm not sure where I am with the state parks at this point, because we have Swan Pond in Fairfield that is usually sold out by about 9 o'clock in the morning. We get a lot of out-of-staters there. But I have heard concerns from friends of mine who serve in the police departments and other areas that they normally carry a pistol or a concealed pistol for personal safety, because, I have been in situations where, let's say a police officer pulls over somebody in the afternoon, gives them a ticket, and then bumps into them later somewhere else, and then there's threats and things of that sort, or you don't know if there's so there's concerns there. And now, do we make exceptions for them, or do we make exceptions for also? I'm not sure exactly where the bill's at, where it's going. I'm not sure exactly how I feel, because sadly, like I said earlier, many of the bills that get passed are because of reactions to something else we're trying to prevent. As far as the uniform gun laws, I think they should be uniform throughout the state. Just like my colleagues have said, you don't want to have a list of laws in the front seat of your car to say, can I stop here, can I stop there? Consistency and transparency, I think, has to be paramount to one. And as a responsible gun owner, these laws come about not because of the responsible gun owner, but it's because of the irresponsible. And sadly, they're the ones that grab the spotlight, and they grab it because it's normally something horrific that we look at and say, gee, we could have prevented that. But I will look into these forward. I don't know the language on it. Like I said earlier, there were over 3,000 bills that were put up. And every day I'll get a different email saying, hey, what about this thing? I'll look at it and go, it's absolutely right. I wish I had known about this sooner. I would have helped with it. I would have co-sponsored. But I'm very open to your ideas, and I will look into it.
Just one final note. The Symbol 940 authorizes certain persons to carry handguns in state parks, state forests. That was voted on March 20th, and it failed. It was 15 yay, 23 nays. We voted against it. I doubt that's going to come back again.
Next question.
My name is Kay Schoenberg, and I guess from what I've heard, I'm an oddity because I moved into Connecticut last year.
Did you join the league?
Next to getting my library card, that was the next thing. But I have an interesting question. I was a good citizen, and I went to get my driver's license. And while I was there, no, I'm not going to complain about the service. I mean, that's a known, and it was horrible. But what I was interested in was when I finished all my paperwork, the man gave me my temporary license and explained to me I would be getting my regular license in the mail soon. It could be a couple of weeks because the Connecticut driver's licenses are produced in Massachusetts. Now, I've heard so much talk about all the transportation issues that need funding. Why in the world are we outsourcing making our Connecticut driver's licenses?
Believe it or not, we save, I agree with you, the premise, and I just got I had my birthday in February, I did the same thing, I waited 2 weeks to get my license in the mail. We saved about $2.4 million. It kind of reminds me of Praxair, which is based in Danbury. If you go to Danbury Hospital, hopefully you know, but there's Praxair Cancer Center, there's Praxair Cardiac Center. The oxygen that's delivered in Danbury Hospital is not Praxair oxygen, it's Lindy. So I asked the former president of Praxair, why is it that Lindy, your competitor, is now they're combined, that just happened this year, but why is it that your competitor, he goes, we can't make oxygen in Connecticut for what they could buy it from our competitor. I would say that one thing I'm happy about is that I proposed 2 bills this year. One will make our driver's license 8 years versus 6 years, and the other would make our voter registration 3 years versus 2. 3 years makes sense to me because that's when most car leases expire. 8 years, 6 years I don't think is enough to do a driver's license. New York State is 10 years. Governor Lamont has agreed to put that in his budget, so that'll be the case. So our vehicle trips to motor vehicle will be less. But I'll look into that, but 2.4 million is 2.4 million. It doesn't sound like a lot of money, but it is when we're dealing with the budget that we're facing.
I just had no idea. I'm stunned to learn that they're made in Massachusetts. I'll also look into it, but I just want to mention that I'm a big supporter of what Representative Frey is doing in terms of the DMV and the frequency with which we expect citizens to interact with that agency. I think that there's no reason we can't stretch out some of these timetables. And just one final thing, while we're talking about the DMV, we have right now opt-in voter registration in accordance with the motor voter law that passed in the 90s. When you interact with the DMV or DAS or a variety of state agencies, you can easily opt in to vote. But what 15 states and the District of Columbia have done is move to an opt-out system. And so now a third of the country is automatically registered to vote unless they choose not to. It dramatically increases voter registration, obviously. It also increases the accuracy of voter rolls because there's constantly streaming information between the state government and the list of who's registered to vote. I think it's a huge step in making democracy more accessible and participatory. So just while we're talking about DMV, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that made it out of our committee. We were there till 8 a.m. on a Friday night, but we finally got it out last night, automatic voter registration, which is exciting.
I wish half of my committee meetings were done by 8 p.m. because we've been there as late as 1:45 the next day, and I've had to explain to my girlfriend, by the way, that dinner we were going to do? Yeah. Where are you? I'm at work. No, I'm not. Yeah, you are. Turn on the TV. See me sitting over there? I'm still here. So I really can't hide too much. You're absolutely right. Now, one of the things that was a setback with DMV was we used to have AAA dual licenses. That's where I had my last one done. And it was in and out, 2 seconds done. And even if you weren't a member of AAA, you just made a little bit more, but you were in and out. I think we need to look more at that. But again, extending the time between driver's licenses, yes. Extending the length of your motor vehicle registrations, yes. So these are all things that are currently going through the legislature. And welcome to Connecticut.
Next question, please.
Thank you. Thank you for this outstanding program today. My name is Roma Stibberly. I'm president of an organization called NGO Sustainability. And we all know that our planet is burning. And I'd like to know, since we have 2 members of the Environment Committee here, what legislation is on dealing with reaching the goals for zero carbon?
Thank you so much for your question, Rona. The Environment Committee has been a real heavy lift this session. I think that's a wonderful thing. There are so many bills put forward by Democrats and Republicans to reduce carbon emissions. I'll talk about, well, first of all, we passed carbon pricing out of committee, I believe, 2 weeks ago, and that was a major step. I think that this will help to even the playing field between obviously dangerous greenhouse gases that pollute our atmosphere and renewable energy, which at the moment is a bit more expensive, but if we help create a market that's more competitive for renewable energy by putting a price on carbon, I think we can make huge steps in the right direction. We've got to also change our net metering system, because when I was door knocking, I met a lot of people who would install solar panels because they were financially incentivized to do so. When they changed the formula, all of a sudden that financial incentive went away. It's not enough to ask people out of the goodness of their hearts to install solar panels on their business, on their school, on their home. We have to also make it financially possible and also, actually palatable for them to do so. Finally, a bill that's in the weeds that I introduced, but I'm really proud, survived all of the lobbyists trying to pick it apart and is now headed to the Senate floor, is a bill that would limit the amount of methane gas leakage that natural gas pipelines can leak into the atmosphere. Forgive me for going in the weeds here, but Eversource is allowed in Connecticut to leak 3% of its gas into the atmosphere. This is really dangerous gas that has a horrible effect on our ozone layer, and in many other states they have a 0% threshold or a 1% threshold. What we're allowing the natural gas companies to do is the equivalent of saying to the oil companies, you can spill 40 trucks and not clean a single drop up. That's crazy. First of all, the oil companies hate it because it's really unfair. They have a 0% threshold. If they spill a drop of oil, the state requires them to clean it up. But also, just because this gas is invisible doesn't mean it's not having a negative impact on our atmosphere. So I put in a bill that would bring our threshold from 3% down to 1%. The natural gas companies and all of their lobbyists fought it really, really hard, but we got it out of committee, and now we need to pass it in the full Senate. So I hope that, you'll all help me in doing that, because it's gonna be a heavy lift, but I think it's really important.
We know that methane is worse than carbon.
I don't serve on I don't serve on the Environment Committee, but I'll certainly make that work for me out.
So to get back to the methane leakage, yeah, the gas company, I was there for that public hearing, I think that one might have been one of the earlier ones, maybe 11 or 12 o'clock at night. But the other thing that people didn't realize is with all this leakage, you guys get charged for it. So they could spill it all over the streets, we suffer with the environment going south, but we also, you guys pay for the destruction because they don't want to fix their leaky pipes. I mean, in Danbury, we have issues where we had the St. Patrick's Day parade last weekend, and I'm walking up West Street, and there's all these 1-inch holes drilled all through the middle of West Street. And I look at the councilman and said, what are all these holes for? Well, the gas lines are leaking. If they don't put these holes in the asphalt, the road's gonna blow up. Well, that makes me safe. I'm glad I don't smoke, you know? But also another thing that I've learned on the Environment Committee, I serve with a representative from Stanford, David Michel. He's French, he's very passionate about the oceans. And we talk about clean energy, and we talk about harnessing wind and solar. And the governor right now is looking into wind farms, which sound like a great idea. Until he explains, since his background is in dealing with sea life. The wind turbines they want to put out off of Martha's Vineyard and out in the ocean are being pile-driven 36-foot diameter pipes. And he says that the reverberation of sound waves through the water would disrupt all sea life in that area. That all the mammals, the whales and such, use that for navigation, they use it for food. The fishermen are nervous because they know where to go fishing. Now you start pounding these large bells into the ground. And I used to design pilings. My job, out of college, I designed the pilings underneath the Danbury Square Mall. I know what that sounds like. I also used to teach swimming as a kid. In fact, I taught at the Barlow Mountain YMCA in Ridgefield back in the day. Somebody could make a noise at one end of the pool and it sounded like they were blowing an eardrum. So I can't imagine a 36-foot diameter pipe being driven into the seabed. I said, well, how do we get there with clean energy? There's a company, and I just forgot the name, right out of my head. They make a floating, temporary floating, I should say, turbine. Now, every carpenters union in the state of Connecticut thinks it's a great idea. Every concrete company in the state of Connecticut thinks it's a great idea. Why? You make these, it looks like an upside-down wine glass. Okay? It's made on shore. It floats, you bring it out to where you need to put in your wind turbine, and then they fill it with sand and it sinks down to the bottom, and it's anchored to the seabed. No reverberation or negative aspects to the environment as far as the noise. It puts Connecticut carpenters and steel workers and concrete men to work. And I said to a few people who want to put a casino in Bridgeport, why don't we put a concrete plant down there and build wind turbines? So we have jobs here in Connecticut. It not only does it help with the jobs in Connecticut, it also is a supply chain that helps other businesses like O&G and others grow, which also then helps all the communities around, because when you have more disposable income, small businesses do well. So there are ways that we can be clean. There are ways that we can be thoughtful about the environment, but we also have to look at what it takes to get there.
Next question, please.
Morning, gentlemen. Andrew Nevlin, Ridgefield resident. This goes to all of you. Ridgefield's a wonderful town. You guys represent us. But there seems to be a Robin Hood mentality that's going on lately with the initiatives and proposals that are going on, such as making the car registration tax go to the state, proposing that the property taxes get, the mill rate goes down, but then that money goes to the state, and then have the state repurpose the money back to the towns and cities that need it. Ridgefield being regardless of what side of the fence you're on, seems to have managed itself quite well through the recession and going forward, and where I would say we're showing an example how to do that in the state, where many of the cities and other towns have not done such a great job, and it feels like that Ridgefield is going to be paying the penalty for their mismanagement with some of these initiatives. So my question is this, just taking like the state, the car tax going to the state instead of staying here as a revenue stream for local, for Ridgefield, other revenue streams, what side of the fence are you on for that?
I don't think you're going to see too many of those bills actually going away. I mean, there were proposals by the governor's budget, which again, like I said earlier, was on arrival when it came to the legislature. If you're going to start pushing, we've already had mismanagement issues with the state as far as revenue. So do we really want to take, and I'm sure Rudy could say this, but your property taxes that fund your schools, fund your municipality, and put it into one lump sum to ferry it back out? I don't think that's going to go anywhere. Second of all, myself being somebody with cars and collector cars and things of that sort, you may push people to register their vehicles out of state. It comes down to the town to enforce law. I know if you go into the town of New Fairfield, a lot of New York license plates there. Why? Because they're on the border. They don't want to pay the property taxes that the vehicle would bring in. So I think it would further exacerbate the problem. But I think until we actually see what comes out of the legislature, keep your voice known, keep sending emails to us to keep this on the forefront. But I think a lot of that is, again, it was in the governor's budget. Like I said, the prescription drugs and the prescription drug tax and the grocery tax that we were talking about, it went nowhere. It's going nowhere. I have a feeling that's the way it's going to be. I mean, towns need to be autonomous. There are needs and concerns here in Ridgefield that don't apply to towns like Sherman. There's needs and concerns that may apply to Bridgeport but don't apply to Canaan. So I just don't see it really going too far.
Yeah, I would agree, and it's something that Ken mentioned earlier. The governor proposed his budget, a month or so ago, and in my 21 years, we've never adopted the governor's budget as the budget. So it goes through, it's kind of like sausage making, and it's going to go through, we're cranking it through the system. I don't think there's absolutely any appetite to redo the auto tax that was originally proposed. Among other things, the tax on groceries and prescriptions, and some of the things that we're going to tweak and probably not do. Not to say that, in the end, some tax increases might be part of the equation, and there's not nearly enough addressing the expenditure side that I would prefer. But the item that you talked about specifically, I don't think it's going to be approved.
I think that Representative Frey is right in saying that there's really no appetite for this, Republicans or Democrats. As I understand, it's been proposed year after year that the state take some of the motor vehicle taxes collected by towns away from them. I don't see that happening viably, given the fact that each one of us, here's from our first selectman. I mean, I think the same day got a call from Rudy Marconi, who, as you said, has managed Ridgefield's finances so responsibly, saying, this would be a $7 or $8 million hit in this town. $7 million hit in Wilton, $8 million hit, or $9 million hit in Westport. I'd like to figure out a way to address the inequality in car taxes and manage to hold our towns harmless. So the issue that I think the governor is trying to get at in his budget is that a Prius in Bridgeport has a higher tax paid upon it than a Ferrari in Westport. And that's not right. If you're a working parent who has to get your kids to school or get to work every day, we need to make sure that it's affordable for those who live in cities where the mill rate can be as high as 50 mills. We need to make sure it's affordable for them to own a car and operate a car. So I think that there are more moderate proposals out there that hold a town like Ridgefield harmless while simultaneously making it possible for those who live and work in our cities to afford a motor vehicle. I look forward to working with the House Moderate Caucus, among others, to try to figure out a middle road that does reward and to maintain the high level of fiscal responsibility that's long been the tradition here in Ridgefield.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Okay, we have about 8 minutes left.
There's only two guys.
Yeah, a quick question.
Okay.
My name is Gannon Ward. I live in Ridgefield. I work in healthcare in Danbury. And as I'm sure you know, under the Affordable Care Act, young adults up to the age of 26 are allowed to stay on their parents' health insurance. An explanation of benefits, which we're all aware of, is often mailed home to the subscriber of the insurance, indicating what services were used by which provider. I asked, would you support legislation that would allow dependent children of insurance subscribers to opt out of having that explanation of benefits, the EOB, sent home when the insurance services are used?
I would. I think it's an important part of maintaining privacy, especially around reproductive health and freedom. If we want to make sure that young people especially, are making responsible choices, that they're going to legal and licensed healthcare providers, I think that maintaining their privacy is really, really important.
Haven't given it much thought. Obviously, in many cases, the parents are paying for the policy. However, HIPAA is, kind of trumps all. And
HIPAA provides, like, you can accept out of it if you're like a domestic violence victim, but this is the insurance mails at home. I'm assuming a case where a young adult has been given an insurance card by their parent to say, use this for your health care needs, might seek, as Will mentioned, some health care services that they are concerned about their parents not approving of in their early 20s, and then a bill coming home to dad saying, so-and-so received these services. It's not a bill, it's an explanation of what the insurance was used for. I would like the patient, the person accessing the services, to say, don't send this home, or send it to my personal email address when they're accessing services.
I understand what you're saying, but it could fall under HIPAA because of say the 25-year-old had a wisdom tooth pulled. That can't be disclosed. It can't be disclosed to the insurer currently, but that specific procedure under HIPAA is not supposed to be disclosed. And there's certainly ones that are more complicated and more confidential than having a wisdom tooth pulled. So I would have to give that. I served on the Insurance and Real Estate Committee for probably a dozen years. I haven't served on that in a while now, but that's kind of a new one, but as a matter.
I would agree with what you're saying, and we don't want to demonize young adults for going for health care with the stigmatism, whether it be embarrassment or whether it be other personal things that may be going on. Because all that's going to do is push them to not get health care when they need it, and not get the coverage not be supported when they're down. I mean, as it is, teenagers, I remember those years, it was quite a long time ago, you feel you're invulnerable. You can take anything, but if you're actually going to the doctor, and it's a personal item, and it's between you and the doctor, especially if they're over the age of 18. So we don't want to stigmatize them. And if they have an open family and a good relationship with their parents, they'll probably tell them anyway. So we don't know what the homeland is. I would support that.
Dick Motion. I currently serve on the Board of Finance in Ridgefield. Thank you for the car tax not eliminating the car tax. Rudy probably feels the same way.
Rudy knows where I live.
Yeah. We talked about guns, tolls, regionalization. One area that's sort of fallen under the radar a little bit. I was reading an article about the abuses of excess vacation pay for Yukon executives. I don't know if you've read that article or not, but if I might be allowed, if I can find it. You've let everybody up here wander on. I understand you. I just want to read real fast that Susan Hertz, who's retiring, was exceeding the overtime limit, the vacation day limit, by $214,000 she was going to get. Other administrators exceeded the 60-day limit. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were going to be paid until somebody in the Preston State Legislature picked up on it, and now she is turning back some of that money. We know that the athletic program is $47 million in the hole, despite many successes in tournaments. Is there any more oversight that the legislature can do about the abuses at UConn, plus the fact that they're raising the tuitions?
There's virtually no oversight at UConn. Let me explain why. We give them, sorry, come on, let's go with that. Arm wrestle. We give them one bottom line number. It's kind of like the town of Ridgefield allocates to the Board of Education one number. We don't get involved into the nitty gritty on a per line item basis. It's very similar to the Yukon. It's unusual in that the other academic areas of the state, we do get involved in line by line items, but we don't in Yukon. So Susan Earp's right. She did say, okay, 50 of her days she's not going to take the comp time that she had accrued. We need to have some more oversight of that. We have some of the highest paid state employees are UConn employees. Now you can justify that partly because A, they're academically trained, they're physicians, which they could get that. They worked at Western Connecticut Healthcare and Yale University and elsewhere. But they're not all, we've got coaches mixed in there and others as well. But it's a little bit of an anomaly that they get one bottom line. And we've got some, year after year, the John Dempsey Hospital, UConn Hospital is running at a loss, as are other sports teams, as you mentioned. So it needs to be retooled. That's not going to happen this year. It's not on the agenda. But it's something that has been over the years, and we'll continue to look at, I'm sure.
I'll just say very briefly, increased oversight and enforcement is always a good idea. Representative Frey proposed a bill that would put more students on the Board of Regents. I think that student input when you're talking about things like raising tuition is a great idea, so we voted for that at the Higher Education Committee a few weeks ago. I hope, though, that this poor behavior of certain individuals is not used as an excuse or as a justification for cutting out higher education investments as a whole, because I do think that higher education is ultimately the best investment we can make. 23,000 students graduate with a bachelor's degree every year in Connecticut. We need to dramatically increase that number. We need to make it more accessible and affordable. We have to invest in community colleges, and overall, I think, make sure that we're spending money on the students and not on the administrators whenever possible.
I will just echo everything that's been said beforehand. You're right, there should be a little more oversight. I personally have a problem with, a football or a basketball coach gets $6 million. I know they say it comes back in revenue for whatever, but the bottom line is you're there for an education, that, I had to college, that's why I worked at Barlow Mountain YMCA back in the day, and other places, but yeah, you're right. We need to look into that. I do understand the budget part aspect. When the Board of Education comes to Danbury, we don't look for a line item thing. We look at their whole budget. We give them a whole one set amount, and they have to spend it responsibly. It is up to the legislature though to look at maybe UConn's ask and say, well, gee, last year you had this year, last year you had that. How are you going to improve, and how are you going to take care of these issues?
Editorial comment: her salary at retirement town was $770,000.
All right, I'm closing. It's kind of like voting. As long as I'm in line by 8 o'clock, I get to vote, so.
That's actually not the case in every municipality. We worked on that yesterday.
Question for all three of you gentlemen. Wayne Flogel here, by the way. HR 21 passed both in the House and the Senate on Wednesday regarding bonuses and stuff, from what I can tell. How did you vote and why? Again, mainly focusing on the district attorney, or the attorney general office getting bonuses up to $12,000 a year, costing us taxpayers $3.3 million for the next 2 years.
Yeah, I voted no. I broke with my party. I was one of the few Democrats who voted with the Republicans on this. Not because I think the assistant attorney generals aren't doing a great job. I think they are. In fact, they bring in a lot of revenue because of the suits that they enter into on all of our behalf every single day. The problem is our last best offer rules in Connecticut require the union gives a last best offer and the state gives a last best offer, and then a neutral arbiter has to basically decide between the two, and the the state's was perhaps not as generous as it should have been, but the union's was, I think, too generous in giving these folks an 11% raise. So I voted no. It was a tough vote. I try to look at every single contract that comes before us evenly and from the perspective of what that neutral person looking at those two best offers would have had in their mind.
I voted no. Up until recently, the state contracts, unless one body voted against it, it went into effect automatically, and we never had a vote. So last 2 years, we have had votes on these. We were looking at 12% increases in some cases to the assistant attorney generals. And actually, last year, Ben Barnes, Governor Malloy's budget secretary, said that we couldn't afford that contract. So I voted against it. It was not, it's a significant cost. It's not factored into the Governor Lamont's budget. So I just thought the timing was wrong. I voted against it. And I thought it was overly generous.
I guess I'll rank with them. I did vote in favor of it, but I voted in favor of it because, and I don't have my notes with me, 2009, 2012, they did not get a pay increase. And then 2014 to now, they didn't get a pay increase. And what the argument was that the Attorney General's office brings in over $714 million a year in lawsuits. They're saying by having this $12,000 increase, we don't want to lose the talent that we have there, because these Attorney Generals, what happens is they'll start working for the state, then they get an offer from a private firm and they're gone. So we educate them, we get them working for the state, they get their benefits, and then they move on. Because no attorney, and I'm not an attorney, but no attorney works for as little as the Attorney General's office employees do. So we start losing the talent that is bringing in this revenue that we should be getting. So it was kind of, even though I hated to see the increase, it's something that we can't afford to lose. Because if they're bringing in $715 million a year with their job, this is a small bit to pay for them not getting the pay raises that most normal people would get, because we held off and held off and held off. And we get to the point when a worker feels unappreciated, they go somewhere else. So we lose that talent. So I voted in favor of it because of that. And the other thing that I'm nervous about, which just went through planning, part of one of the bills that came through is they're trying to get rid of those neutral negotiators. So now they'll have a panel decide. So we may wind up with not getting the representation for us, but also for the people that work on our best behalf. So I'll be the odd man out. I was the one that voted in favor of it. But for those very reasons, I think we should retain the talent that we have. We need to reward people that do the work for us. And this wasn't overly generous in my attitude. It was finally catching up to, they're still way underpaid, but catching up to what they should have got had we been given them the raises we should have been giving them all along.
Representative Gucker, thank you. Representative Frey, thank you. Senator Haskell, thank you for your time. Thank you for serving on our behalf and our representative democracy. And thank you